and welcome to The Resource, the podcast propelling employer brands to recruit smarter and retain better. I'm your host, Priscilla Peters.
And I'm your other host, Scott Dismuke. And Priscilla, feels like it's been a while since we've done this.
I know we did our data rundown webinar that we recorded. That was an episode. We've had different guests on. We've just been doing things a little bit different, but here we are back in the studio. Post
Yeah.
R&R conference, by the way. We're on the heels of the R&R conference, which I know that you had a great session that you did, a great workshop. A lot of people have been talking about it, by the way, Scott. What's the cost of losing a driver? Which I love that. But we had a pretty good event, even with the snow and the ice. A little bit of that came to Nashville.
Yeah, it was a challenging week, both for weather and for me being under the weather. As you well know, I missed most of Thursday with a little illness, but came back strong on Friday. I pushed through and came out Friday, and thanks to my good friend David Broyles at Averett. But we did have a good little presentation, and we talked about the cost of turnover. And I'm glad to hear that people are talking about it and talking about some numbers that we threw out. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was great. We had a good time. Listen, we call that at the Peters house, we call that digging deep. Dig deep. We've always said we need t-shirts because my daddy used to say that. You just got to dig deep. So you dug deep. You know what I'm saying? But we had a great conference. Now we're kind of going into spring. I don't know about Nashville, but in Little Rock, it is. I sat on the patio and had lunch yesterday.
Did you?
Yes. It was a balming 70 degrees, and I was like, I'm here for it. It was great. So
it's 75 degrees in Nashville today.
Yeah. So we're kind of grooving and easing into spring. I know we always have a lot of stuff that we do in the spring. We'll have our spring driver survey. We'll have all that going on. But the real question is, Mardi Gras is right around the corner. Do you do Mardi Gras? Do you participate? Do you give things up for Lent? Do you do all the things?
My wife does. My mother-in-law does. I don't guess. I mean, I was raised Southern Baptist. I don't guess that was really or at least at my church, it wasn't a thing. I always jokingly tell my family that I give up vegetables for Lent, and you know what? I'm successful every stinking year. Every year, I'm so committed to it. I don't touch one vegetable.
Yeah, it depends on the year for me. Sometimes I'll do like, let's just not watch as much TV or, but this year I don't even have time to think about. I mean, it's been so crazy, and probably because we're post conference right now. So I'm just trying to kind of catch up after everything, but it's a fun time of year. I know we have a lot of stuff going on. Normally this would be an episode where we would have a guest and all of that fun stuff, which we do have a great guest coming up next month. So please be on the lookout for that. But this particular episode, we're going to really kind of recap some data and look at, we just released our 2024 snapshot, which just kind of has high level. Here's some top high level data points from recruiting and top high level data points from retention. And so we're going to just kind of go through some of that and make sure that we touch on all the things we thought were pretty critical coming out of 2024. And then we'll just land the plane and we'll be like, you know what? We're in 2025. Let's just go. So normally we would be sharing data with you right now in our little resource segment, but this is a little bit different. And so we'll kind of skip that, if you will, because we've got lots of data to show you. But I do have a first 5 question for you. So we're gonna get to that. This episode is super fitting because, like I said, we're gonna really kind of give a lot of resources today through data. But before we do that, let's kind of dig into our first 5. Let's hit our final mile first 5, sponsored by Driver.jobs, your destination for hiring the drivers you need for your final mile operations. Driver.jobs, matching the right drivers with the right opportunities for every last mile. Scott, I don't know if you know, it's awards season. As in, we just had the SAG Awards. Don't know if you watched it. I love the award shows. I love them so much. I love the fashion. I love the how celebrities don't like to rehearse. And so they do a horrible job of reading the teleprompter, which as a speech minor, I do not appreciate in any way, shape, or form. I feel like you should be rehearsed and ready to go, right? But listen, we've got the Grammys, we've got that just happened, we've got the Oscars coming up. Or wait, have we had the Oscars? No,
Nope.
not yet.
I actually think they're this as we're
Yeah,
recording. I think
coming
it's
up as we're
Sunday. Yeah.
recording. So it made me think this. Okay, this is interesting. This was hard for me when I was thinking about it. Would you rather live in a world that was without movies or without music? I think I know where you're going to land.
I think you're going to be surprised.
Oh,
So I listen to music every day in some way, shape, or form, whether it's my commute to and from work, working out. I'm listening to music, usually to that or podcast. Movies have been so disappointing of late. Like the day and age of the blockbuster, like all of this stuff. I have no idea what's even nominated for an Oscar, and I'm not really sure I care. And plus, there's other things like there's nothing that replaces music. Music is music is music. With movies, if movies go away, you still have TV. You still have, there you won't be movies, but you still have different shows that you can watch. There's sports that you can watch. I think I could much easier live without movies than I could live without music.
yeah. Well, originally when I read I thought you might say movies, but I see what you're saying. When I originally read the question, my like instinct was to say, oh, movies. But I'm like you, like, I don't know. I can't think of the last time when I'm like, oh, I watched a really good movie. Now, I've watched some really good limited series.
Yep.
I mean, I think we've gone to this, which how weird is it? I was watching the SAG Awards. They were on Netflix. That the fact that an award show is streaming live on Netflix to me, I did not have that on my bingo card for 2025 5 years ago.
Everything's going to Netflix. I mean,
It's
you're getting
crazy.
live sporting events. I mean, that Mike Tyson fight that happened
That
back in the
was
fall. I mean,
yeah.
that was that. So I mean, that's where it's going. I mean, you've got
Mm.
football it's streaming on Amazon they've started that on Thursday night. So I just think it's going there. So yeah, I don't know. My initial thought was I could do without music. I want movies. I want to be entertained. But if movies go away, I mean, I can't tell you the last time I actually went to the theater and watched a movie. I can't remember the last time there was a movie came out that I was like, I can't wait to go to the theater and watch it. So I
Yeah.
think like as it stands right now, you can take my movies away, and I think I would be perfectly fine. But don't take my music.
You can't take my stories that I watch on a screen away though. Like that's my thing. But anyway, no, that's a good one. My children love music so much that it is I mean, that they listen to music way more than I'm like you. I mean, I listen to music in some way every day, but I'm a podcast listener. So,
Yeah, me too. Like the
and we
resource.
appreciate those.
I listen to the resource.
We appreciate podcast listeners around these parts. So, yeah, so that was our first 5.
Yeah, I like that. Good stuff. Let's kind of get into this because I know we each have some points here. And so I'll just kind of kick off. To get to my first data point, I've got to tell you about an initial data point to get to it. So my first data point is kind of goes back to what we did in the fall in our fall driver survey, where we had kind of our record number of drivers that told us they were actively looking for a job. So I believe it was 40.7%. One of the data points that really stood out to me in 2024 was of that 40% of drivers that said they were actively looking was what are they looking for? Why are they looking? And 81.9% of the drivers said they were looking for predictable pay, which, if you think about it, really makes sense. If you think about what the freight economy has been like the last 2 years, that doesn't really surprise me that they're looking for predictable pay. I think the thing that really jumped out to me was that it was such a high number. Almost 82% of those 40% that said they were looking are looking for that predictable pay. And so, as we get into 25 and as the economy turns, let's hope, very soon. I think those to your to your expertise here in the recruiting side of things, if you're one of those carriers that has the freight as things begin to turn, because I'm not sure it's just going to be kind of an overnight thing. I think this is going to gradually happen over weeks. But if you're one of those carriers that actually has freight that has available miles, I'm pretty sure that's what I would be advertising, because that's what the drivers are looking for, and if you've got it, then you need to advertise you got it. So that's my first point, is not that was the number one thing, the predictable pay. It was just that it was so many, it was so obvious, and such a large number of those drivers said they're looking for predictable pay.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think another thing to keep your eye on related to predictable pay is pay transparency laws. Listen, we had a session on it R&R, but it is a real thing, if you will. People always kind of joke or complain, frankly, those of us who are in trucking, that, there's these attorneys that just go chase after big rigs that are in accidents, right? Like you see it all over TV and ads. Well, they're beginning to do the same thing related to pay transparency. There's 14 states, I believe, right now that have pay transparency laws, and it's a real thing. And so when you're talking about predictable pay, just keep in mind it's important for you and your legal team to know and understand what the pay transparency laws are. You can't, in some states, you can't say you're going to earn up to $85,000. No, you have to give a true range, and there's a lot of kind of parameters around that. So I think that's really important, but it's something that we had a lot of folks ask for that were interested in that. So I think it's interesting to just think about when you're talking about predictable pay. Okay, so my first kind of data point from our 2024 snapshot that I wanted to highlight is also a big number. So it was such a high percentage that I didn't think we could have a conversation about 2024 and not mention it. So 85% of drivers on our driver survey, that we ask them, are you applying for more than one job at a time when you're applying for a job? 85% of them said they were. Now, that they were applying to at least more than one. Some of them said, guess what? I'm applying 2 or 3 or 4 or 7 but 85% of them. So for me, I think it's really important for carriers to think think about their speed to hire, and what type of processes, efficiencies, technology do you have in place today that really gets you to the hire fast. Because the reality is there's an 85% chance that you're competing against at least one other company for that driver. Now, most, typical positions, that's not necessarily untrue, right? If I was looking for a new job, I might apply to multiple jobs as well. But in trucking and from a driver perspective, it's so important because of the process. And once you start a conversation with the driver and it's meaningful, that is super important. So I would just say, keep in mind you're almost always, as they say, you're almost always going up against another company that the driver has applied to. So who can work that lead the fastest? Who can get to the lead the fastest? And honestly, some of the other data points that I'm going to talk about kind of touch on that as well, just because the way that technology is today, it's not only helping you with speed to hire, time to hire, however you want to say it, but also in cost savings too. So we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, 85% of drivers
Well, and
applying to multiple jobs.
I think what I would add to that is not only speed to hire, but if they're applying for that many, then that probably means if you're the first, you're probably not the only that gives them a job offer. So on top of the speed to hire, which is very important, doing what you say you're going to do is also important. Otherwise, they're going to be gone probably in less than 30 days, because those other places they're applying to have probably also given them offers. And a matter of fact, I talked with a carrier last week who was working with a driver in orientation. There was a delay on a drug test, And they said, don't worry about it. I'll just go back to my old carrier. He goes, well, did you quit? He said, no, I'm just on PTO. He hadn't even quit his
Okay.
previous carrier, and he was already sitting in another carrier's orientation. So they're going to be able to get back to a carrier, whether it's a former carrier or somebody that's also offered them a job, because if they're applying for that many, they're probably getting several offers too.
Right, right, for sure.
So my next point is kind of this is kind of my Debbie Downer moment, for lack of better terms. I've kind of been saying this, and I'm trying to remember how much of it I've said on the podcast, but I am very fearful of when the economy rebounds that turnover is going to go up. Historically, that's been true. Our data is showing that that's true. And one of the things that has me concerned about that is building on the 40% who've already told us they're actively looking. The drivers that told us they weren't, of those 20%, or I'm sorry, 21.5% said they're just waiting for the economy to improve. So if you add that 40 to that 21, you're over 60% of the drivers who could be looking for a job in the next 2, 3, 4 months. And that is very concerning. I've had 3 carriers in the last week. This has been since the R&R conference has finished. And to put it in perspective, if you're listening to this, this is Wednesday. The R&R conference ended less than a week ago. So in less than a week, I've had 3 carriers reach out to me and say, my turnover's going up. What are you hearing? And I've asked them, one of my first questions I usually ask them is, are these new hires? Are they tenured drivers? Where do you see the turnover happening? And they said it's spread across, which is a little concerning because most of the time your turnover is going to happen in the first 6 months. But we're seeing tenured drivers, we're seeing less tenured drivers kind of spread across. I know I've said this on previous episodes that I think for the most part, drivers, if they've not been patient with what's going on economically, I think they understand that grass isn't greener on the other side right now from an economy standpoint. But as we've talked about on previous episodes, I think that patience is either gone or wearing extremely thin. We see that in the data. So I think you have to be ultra prepared right now as the economy turns, which, like I said, hopefully is very, very soon. Your turnover very likely is going to go up. Drivers are going to start hopping. We know that companies are going to start advertising more. So those opportunities are going to be out there. So that's kind of my Debbie Downer moment. I think it's coming. I think it's going to be not very pleasant because the data is telling us that.
Yeah, I had somebody say to me, we were just talking about, we haven't seen a downturn this long, like that's been this long, and he goes, "Yeah, and we're about to not see. We've probably never seen drivers chase miles like they're getting ready to chase miles." And I thought, wow. I mean, that to me was pretty telling. I was like, he's probably right. I mean, there's probably going to be a window of time where there are a lot of drivers chasing those miles, especially that 21.5%, right? It sounds like they're already kind of getting ready for it. So that's interesting. So the next one I wanted to share was, a lot of times we talk to people and that carriers say to us, specifically recruiting leaders will say, I'm just really tired and frustrated with being seen as such a cost center. Like it's hard for me to not be seen as a cost center because I'm spending money to attract drivers. How do I save, and so we have a data analyst team. We have a team of data analysts. And so I literally went to them and said, listen, look at the data for us and let's see like what specifically, if someone says to me, how give me one thing I can do to really save money. So they came back and said they just looked at Q4 of 2024. But they said, listen, and at first I thought it was the whole year. He goes, no, 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 no. This is just Q4. And I was like, well, holy cow, this is significant then. But basically they were telling us carriers who are using, and again, this goes back to the whole speed to hire, time to hire thing. Carriers who are using advanced AI automation to help them get to the driver faster are in our case, it would be carriers who are using our lead assist platform. They are saving 27% overall on their cost per hire versus those who aren't. So like what does that look like in the real world, right? Like how does that work, if you will? So from a super high level, think of it as the lead comes in and you get a short form from a driver, and there is AI technology that is nurturing that lead, continuing to touch base with the driver to get them to get all of the information to get that full application. So there's that, but there's also the component of we have a virtual recruiter aspect of our lead assist platform, and it immediately connects the driver with the recruiter via phone call. So if you think about it, that whole 85% that I talked about before, we know 85% of them are they're actually, you know, they're saying I'm applying to more than one job at a time. That same technology that connects you immediately is going to really help, but also it's going to save you on your cost per hire. Because if you think about it, the work that your team and your resources are having to put into working that lead, that AI automation takes out some of that. I know everybody's like scared of that. Some of, like, oh, I don't want AI recruiting my drivers. Listen, there's a human element to it. Your recruiters can focus on really closing the driver, getting them an orientation, like you said, like making sure that they're nurturing that final part of the hire. But there's information you've got to get to know, are they qualified? Will they work for the positions that you have open? Let the technology really help you with that, or let the technology connect you with them immediately from the virtual recruiter standpoint. So I just thought that really that call out of carriers using advanced AI automation, in this case it's lead assist, are saving 27% off of cost per hire versus those that aren't. That to me was pretty telling. So again, kind of that whole speed to hire thing. It's like, how much can the recruiter person talk about that?
Well, I mean, it's important because it's coming. So whatever you can do to increase the speed to hire, you might as well do it, because if not, somebody else is going to and beat you to it. So,
Yeah.
well, so my last point here has a lot to do with what I think is probably one of the most important aspects of driver retention. So if we're looking at our 2024 data and all the drivers that complained about something operations wise, 72% of the drivers that had an issue within operations said that they had lack of communication issues with their fleet manager or planner, that was their biggest frustration with operations. And the more I look into the whole communication side of things and how it marries up with respect, the whole communication thing can solve so many ills. And one of the absolute worst things you can do is let driver communication go unanswered, which most of the time that's what we hear is the biggest frustration with the driver on lack of communication is no response. 72% is a extremely high number, particularly when communication is going to be your biggest tool to keeping a driver in your truck. And that's proactive communication. It is responding to a driver, and it's how you talk to a driver. I can communicate all day with my wife. I can communicate all day with you, but if I'm yelling at you and I'm telling you everything you're doing wrong, that communication is not effective. And sometimes we have to be told what we're doing wrong. Sometimes there's got to be corrective action to certain things. But it's not just that you have to communicate. It's frankly how are driver managers building relationships with drivers? Because the data will tell you, and this is true just not just within trucking, but outside of trucking, if people are feeling a part of the team and they feel valued, it's a lot harder to leave that job. But if if a driver feels like they're not heard or nobody even cares or really knows who they are, then they have no issues with leaving because they don't feel like they're valued or feel like they're wanted. 72% saying lack of communication, that is a massive red flag. Make sure that you're communicating with drivers. Make sure you're including them on the planning loop, telling them why they're being planned the way they're being planned, what the plan is. If they don't have a load, if they're sitting there waiting on a load, let them know, hey, we're working on it. I understand you're frustrated. We're frustrated too. We're working really hard. We'll keep you posted. Even if you're communicating not necessarily good news, at least you're communicating. If you're not communicating, that driver is sitting in the cab of their truck completely alone, isolated, and all they have is their phone. And guess what's on their phone? We've already talked about it. Other job offers, other texts from other recruiters. So if you don't think communication is important, stop communicating and you'll find out how important it really is.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I've ever told you this. When I worked, my very first job out of college was at a carrier. That's how I got stuck in this industry. But
Stuck.
but well, some days it's stuck, some days it's blessed to be
Yes.
a
Okay.
part of.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, no, but my first job out of college was at Maverick Transportation in Little Rock, great company. And I sat right beside the fleet managers. And back then, I mean, everybody was on the phone. Like, it was a phone call was everything, right? Like, we didn't have all the digital stuff that we have today. But when I tell you, I would just sat and heard conversations with drivers all day from the fleet manager side. I dare say maybe 80% of the conversations didn't have much to do with actually, hey, here's where your, issues they were having or whatever. It was, how are your kids? What's going on? Hey, did you get your hair cut? Because I told you last time you came in here, you need to get a haircut. Like, it was very much personal conversations, and the way that they really valued the driver as, I'm going to get to know him or her. I'm going to get to know their family. I just remember thinking, these people know everything about what, 40, 50, 60 drivers, depending on how many drivers they're managing. That it was very compelling to me and helped me understand the importance of, like, really building that relationship.
So unbelievably important. And I said this at the conference. The other part of communication is knowing the difference between listening to your drivers and hearing your drivers. And the joke I always make is, if you're married, you 100% understand the difference between listening and hearing. Because,
Yes.
I guarantee you ask your husband, is he listening to you or is he hearing you? We know the difference. You know the difference. Same with drivers. If you're just hearing them, if you're not listening to them, if you're not having personal conversations, you know, we have so many carriers ask us, how do you get your data? What is your script? What questions are you asking a driver? And we tell them we don't have a script, because if you have a script, drivers know you have a script. They're very smart, they're very insightful, and they're going to give you answers that they think you want to hear. The most important question you can ask a driver, how's your day going? And then shut up and listen. It's amazing how much information you're going to find out when you just ask them how their day's going. You're going to get all the questions you might have, and some you didn't think you have, are all going to be answered with that one very simple question.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Okay, well, let me kind of wrap this up for us. So I've got one more data point. So one of the things that we know and we've been hearing is, a lot of folks during the recent freight downturn, they had to kind of pull back on the size of their recruiting teams. And so as the recruiting teams got smaller, now, as some of these fleets and carriers are starting to see the freight come back, they actually need more resources in recruiting, but they're not in a position yet where they could add headcount. Maybe their C-suite isn't really wanting them to add headcount. So how do you work the leads you need to work with less folks doing that, right? So one of the things that we've seen is carriers are looking to some outsourcing type of solutions that maybe they hadn't looked at traditionally in the past, to help kind of fill the gap, if you will. So one of the Obviously 10-4 is one of our brands, but so 10-4 does this with lead conversion. They call them lead conversion specialists. But I think the number I really want to focus on is if you pull in an additional resource through lead conversion specialist with 10-4 or some other way, where you're saying, okay, I'm going to add some resources to help me work some of these leads. You do it with technology like we talked about before, but also you can do it with, if you just need more folks to be having conversation with drivers, then you can have up to, and the average is, I talked to Matt Beach and I was like, hey, how many calls are these folks averaging a day? And he said 102. So I've been saying to people, listen, if you, because a lot of folks are like, okay, I have all these leads and now I've got to get them worked. I need help. I need, and I'm like, okay, let's put the technology to work. Great. That's really helping me. How do I get the help on really closing the driver and talking to the driver to get them closed? And these lead conversion specialists are coming into play to the tune of 100 extra calls a day. So I've been saying to folks, what does 100 extra calls a day mean to your recruiting department? Like if you're lean, some teams aren't lean. Some teams they didn't necessarily have to scale back. But I'm just saying if you scaled back, I think it's something to look at in maybe a non-traditional way of how do I help supplement reaching out to these drivers, trying to get them on the phone either through technology or through this lead conversion specialist type of solution. So just some things to think about. If you could add 100 calls a day with just one, that's pretty significant. And a lot of those calls are voicemails, right? Like you're gonna get a voicemail. Drivers are maybe not gonna answer all the time, but there's a lot of different ways to use resources to actually connect. And so that to me is something to just think about for fleets as we're kind of moving into, really, hopefully, like you said, moving into a better economic climate for trucking in general. So that kind of wraps up our 2024 snapshot. We're just going to put 2024 to bed and we're going to say, here we are. Let's go 2025. Right?
Thank God. I'm glad 2024 is over. I'm done talking about it now.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for listening today. Listen, if you had fun, give us a virtual high five by leaving a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button so that you never miss an episode.
And if you have any questions or feedback, you can reach out to us on social media or drop us an email. All of those details are going to be in the show notes. But we will be back next time. And Priscilla's already teased a big guest. I will tease it one more time. You're going to want to tune in next month. We have a big guest that I'm very excited about. But we'll be back next time with more data, insights, and a little fun to help you ace your recruiting and retention game. Everybody have a fantastic day, and we will see you next month.